Welcome back. In the past few lessons, we've talked about JavaScript arrays, and in this video, we're going to go ahead and focus on array iteration. So array iteration allows us to process all the elements in our array by some type of criteria. So usually this involves us using a function, and then we loop through our array, and we access each element one at a time. So this could be used for things like, let's say if we have a list of items and we want to render them to our web page, we could use array iteration to render out those items. If we have a list of items and we want to filter that list down to only include a subset, we could do that as well. And if we wanted to check to see if our array contains some type of item, we could do that as well. So to get started, what we're going to do is if you go ahead and go into your project folder, let's go ahead and go into the 20-array iteration folder and the start subfolder. If you could open up main.js, then in your browser, if you can go ahead and open up the index.html file, you should see array iteration on the page. So for iterating through arrays, we're going to be using some built-in methods that are available to the array data type. And the first one we're going to take a look at is the for each method. So the for each method will call a function or a callback function once for every element in our array. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make an array. So I'm going to go ahead and do my array, and I'm going to go ahead and set it to, and we'll go ahead and I'm just going to add 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 to the array. Go ahead and save. And then what we're going to do for each is we're going to go ahead and do my array dot for each. So we're going to go ahead and do function. And then in our function, we're going to receive 3 arguments. We're going to go ahead and receive the value, the index, and the actual array itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and do value, index, and array. And then we'll go ahead and have our curlies for our function. And then the second argument that we can pass is this argument. So this allows us to specify the scope that will be used when we call this function. So as I mentioned, we'll be covering scope in another video, but I did want to make you aware you can pass scope to this function. But for now, we're going to go ahead and not include it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do console log, and we'll go ahead and do value, console log, index, and then console log, array. And if we go ahead and save and refresh, we can go ahead and take a look at what gets logged. So you'll see right away there are a bunch of items logged to our console. So the first thing that gets logged is the value of that element in our array. So you'll see that we have 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, which correlates to the items in our array. Next, we have our index, so the position of this element. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then finally, we see the value of our array. So the for each method is really great when you need to loop through all elements in your array and do something with them. Alright, so our next method we're going to go ahead and take a look at is so the next method we're going to take a look at is the map method. And the map method is very similar to for each because we're going to loop through all the elements in our array. And what's unique about it is this method is going to return a brand new array after it does some type of function on each array element. So this method cannot be used to modify the original array. Instead, new elements will be created and they'll be added to a brand new array. So to see this as an example, we're going to do const my array2. I'm going to go ahead and set it equal to my array dot map. And then we need to go ahead and pass our callback function. So for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and take value as an argument. So one thing to note is when this callback function is invoked, it will receive the value, index, and array arguments. However, because we're not utilizing them, we don't need to list them as parameters. However, if you did need them, you could utilize them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and do return value plus 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a console log so we can look at my array2. So one key difference you'll notice is we use a return value here. And with the map method, you need to return a value from your callback function. And that's because that is the new value that will be returned to this array. So you'll see here that we have our original array, and then we just added 1 to each of the elements. So now we have even numbers here. Alright, so our next method we're going to take a look at is the filter method. And the filter method is similar to the map method in that it will return a new array as a value. And the refilter method is used to return elements that pass some type of test. One example is if we had a list of even and odd numbers, we only wanted even numbers, we could perform some type of check to make sure that we only return even numbers. Another example is, let's say we only want items that are greater than 5. We could do a check for that as well. So as I mentioned, this returns a new array, so we're going to make a new variable, and I'm going to call this myArray3. I'll set it to equal to myArray.filter, and then similar to our other methods, this will take two arguments. The first is a callback function, the second one is the scope. So I'm going to go ahead and do our function, and same thing as before, I'm only going to do value for my parameter, since I won't need to utilize the other ones right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return value is greater than 5. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and console log our new array. So if we go ahead and save and refresh, so you'll see we get a brand new array with two elements, 7 and 9. So what was happening here is as we loop through our array, we receive the value of our elements, and then basically we're checking here to see if that value is greater than 5. And so if you recall, this statement here is going to return true or false. So when it returns false, then this element will not be returned as an element in this array. However, when it returns true, it will go ahead and return that element and add it to the new array. So the next method we're going to take a look at is our reduce method. And this method is really unique because what it's used for is it will process every element in the array, and its job is to reduce all those elements down to one single value. And how it works is it will go ahead and work from left to right on the array. So it's going to process each element one at a time and do something with them. One great example of using the reduce method is if you want to get the sum of all values in your array. And so to see an example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do const sum. I'm going to set it equal to my array. And I'll go ahead and do reduce. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a callback function. So one thing to note is this callback function does take different parameters than our previous callback functions. So first, we receive the previous value, so whatever the previous reduced value was. So I'm going to go ahead and do prev. Next will be our current value, so the current value of the array. So I'm going to go ahead and do current. Then we go ahead and receive the current index, so the element we're at when we're processing our array. So I'm going to go ahead and do index. And then finally we receive the array itself. So I'm going to go ahead and do array. And then we'll have our curlies for our function. Unlike our previous methods, this one, instead of taking scope, will take an initial value. So this will be the starting value that gets passed into our previous value as an argument in our callback function. So I'm just going to go ahead and do 0 for now, and then I'm going to go ahead and save. So one thing to note, this is optional, but if you do specify it, it will be passed along. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do console log. I'm going to go ahead and do previous, console log, current, console log, index, and then console log, array. So I'm going to go ahead and save and refresh. And then I'm also at the end, I'm going to go ahead and do console log, sum, so we can see what gets returned. So if you go ahead and save and refresh, you'll see right away we get undefined. And the reason for that is because similar to our filter method, we need to return a value. If we do not return a value, we don't actually reduce anything down. And so you'll see that's why we start getting undefined for our previous value in our callback function. However, you'll see at the start, we pass in 0. So you'll see current is set to the value of the current array element, and then we have our index, and then the array that we're processing. So we're going to go ahead and change this. We're going to go ahead and do return our previous value plus our current value. So then I'm going to go ahead and save and refresh. And if we go ahead and add up our numbers, you'll see 1 and 9 is 10, 3 and 7 is 10, and 5, so 25. So our sum, so our reduce function did sum correctly. So just as one more example, if we go ahead and modify our initial value to 10, we should now see 35 returned as our sum.